It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Labour peer Helena Kennedy, leader of Reform UK Richard Tice, Conservative peer Ed Vaizey and Novara Media's contributing editor Ash Sarkar. Today, as we come on air, some breaking news. The police officer who murdered Sarah Everard has been sentenced to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. But what do his crimes mean for trust in the force and the safety of women?
I'm deeply angry. And so, inevitably, yes, that sort of fragile trust, certainly between women and the police, has been fractured yet further.
Also today, it's the end of furlough. Amid increases in the cost of living, the government announces extra support.
We recognise that this is a challenging context on prices, and that's why we're making sure that we make this intervention.
Slogans or changing lives. Slogans we can chant all day.
And Keir Starmer confronts his party's critics, but will the voters buy it? Well, let's start with the news that Wayne Couzens, the serving police officer at the time who raped, kidnapped and murdered Sarah Everard, has been given a whole life order. We can show you some front pages of the newspapers. Here is The Sun. Sarah didn't stand a chance. We can also show you The Guardian. Couzens used police handcuffs and ID to kidnap Sarah Everard. And finally, The Eye newspaper, women losing trust in the police. But can we just start, Helena, with that sentence, a whole life order, your legal background? Explain to us exactly what that means.
Well, what the judge is saying here is that there's going to be no respite, that life means life here. And as it should, because of the nature of this crime. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything more horrifying. And I think it has outraged the nation, and particularly for women, the sense that something has to be done about this kind of crime. And so, yes, I'm sure the accused will be considering whether he will appeal the sentence, and occasionally, life meaning life is appealed and appealed successfully. It will not be appealed successfully in this case, in my view, because of not only was it a police officer, therefore someone who has a special power, which was abused, but also because there's a level of torture involved in this, where someone was, over a period of time, made to have escalating terror as to what was going to happen to her. And then not only being raped and murdered, but on top of that, a defiling of her body. So that as her mother, I mean, I found myself weeping as I listened to her mother speaking about never being able to even see her face again. Not being able to hold her. That is just so appalling. I do not believe that this man will ever see the light of day.
Ed Vaizey, the point that he was a serving police officer, we showed you in the headline, Sue Fish, former Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire, saying that the fragile trust women have in the police is fractured further. Do you agree with that?
Look, I'd echo what Helena said. This is an unbelievably horrific crime, and it is made much more horrific by the fact this was a serving police officer who abused his trust. And those images, those CCTV images of him, inverted commas, arresting Sarah Everard are just too appalling to contemplate. But we, first of all, obviously have to say that there are tens of thousands of fantastic serving police officers who do an incredible job every day to protect us and risk their lives in doing so. We mustn't lose sight of that. And we also mustn't lose sight of the fact that the police are effectively citizens in uniform, and they can only do their job if they have the trust of the public. And that includes all sorts of different communities, and it includes now, I think, a great many women who will be very nervous. Now, Cressida Dick was in court when those very moving statements were read out. The fact that the head of the Metropolitan Police Service was in court to hear those statements is very important, and I hope that she will lean in on this and recognise that there is an issue that police have to address. And I think as well that sometimes when we see, I don't know, police dancing at a carnival or something, and we slightly mock them and say, shouldn't they be doing their job? I think community policing is extremely important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that either. Of course, the police have to, as it were, arrest the bad guys, but they also have to engage with the communities that they serve. And this is very important that we take from this horrific crime the fact that the police do have to engage with women on this issue.
Right, and obviously you want senior police officers to lead in on this interview, but on this issue. But how are women supposed to trust police officers, Ed Vaizey, after these revelations?
Well, I think, the fact that Cressida Dick was there, the fact that she has been relatively high profile since this case came to light. Now, every serving police officer will have been as horrified as every other member of the public as what has happened, even more horrified, if that was possible, that one of their own could commit a crime like this. But it's important to acknowledge the impact that it has, that it was a serving police officer, not to dismiss it as one bad apple, and to recognise, whether it's fair or unfair, that there will be many people in the communities who are served by the police who will now be nervous and concerned. So the simple fact of acknowledging it and engaging with those communities is an important part of the process. That is the key point.
Right. I mean, Ash, Ed said himself, we police by consent in this country. This is surely going to make that much more difficult.
I think what it does is that it goes right to the heart of the vulnerability many women feel in public. And we're told that the police are who you should trust when you feel like you're in danger or you feel like you're being threatened or harassed. And this terrible crime really undermines that trust. But what we need in order to deal with those feelings isn't PR. It's not about Cressida Dick being in the right place. It is root and branch reform. Because yes, police officers up and down the country, I appreciate, feel just as horrified as anybody else by the actions of Wayne Couzens. But the police as an institution have some really serious questions they have to answer. One is, why were the warning signs missed? Wayne Couzens was nicknamed the rapist by his previous colleagues because he made women feel uncomfortable. There are also prior instances of indecent exposure. Why weren't they investigated? Why wasn't he identified as a threat? Why was he still a serving police officer? And then you've got this deeper problem, which is 52% of London officers who were found guilty of sexual misconduct between 2016 and 2020 kept their jobs. You've got 800 allegations of domestic abuse against police officers and staff. So I think you do have this wider problem where violence against women isn't necessarily being taken seriously within the police, and you see this closing of ranks. So while Wayne Couzens is an individual monster, this should be an opportunity to look deeply at the problems within the police. The same way, after the crimes of Harold Shipman came to light, there was a real deep interrogation and overhaul of palliative care. Same thing needs to happen with the police.
Richard?
I think actually Ash has put it really well in that we all want to trust the police. It's vital that communities have trust in the police. There are more police on the streets, uniformed police. But there are real concerns about lessons. Does the police, particularly the Metropolitan Police, do they really learn the lessons of mistakes that are made? I personally was pleased to see Cressida Dick in the courtroom listening, because I've been critical of her leadership in the past. They have to learn lessons. They have to be much more transparent about when things go wrong. And clearly things went badly wrong here, because he was clearly known to have some very bad attitudes. And he was known as a wrong 'un, and yet he was allowed to stay in the force. And I think they've got to learn real lessons from that and be honest when they make mistakes. And that's how you gain trust, is being honest when you get things wrong.
Right. Well, let's have a look at something that Cressida Dick said previously back in June of this year. Now, the comments that she made, we're showing you now, were made in the context of violence against women generally. I have 44,000 people working in the Met. Sadly, some of them are abused at home, for example, and sadly, on occasion, I have a bad 'un. Is that comment really enough, do you think, Ed Vaizey, and, in fact, the reaction generally from police officers to this particular case?
No, it's not enough, simply to say that, which is why I say, and it sort of echoes, again, what Richard was saying, which is that the police have to learn the lessons from this, just as they had to learn the lessons from the horrific murder of Stephen Lawrence. I think the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes, I will defend the police. Of course, I think we have a fantastic police force in this country, but sometimes when the police are culpable and where there are, as it were, institutional problems that need to be addressed, one can be sometimes too defensive and simply say this is one bad apple. I'm keen to make the point that we have a fantastic police service, but I'm also keen to make the point that lessons have to be learned from what the horrific crime against Sarah Everard. And there are many instances, and we read about them in the newspapers, of policemen abusing their trust, raping women and attacking women. And those cases need to be dealt with severely and properly. And I think Ash makes absolutely the right point that sexual misconduct, where a policeman is found guilty, shouldn't be dealt with as some sort kind of employment offence. It should be dealt with the full force of the criminal law. And no policeman should ever think that if they perpetrate any kind of crime against women, that they will somehow get away with it as some kind of, they might just lose their job. They should be prosecuted and they should be made an example of. That is absolutely clear.
Helena?
This goes so much deeper, and I really want to emphasise that part of this is about trivialising some of the things that are considered less important. And the whole business of domestic violence, we've had to work incredibly hard over now many decades, I say as an older woman, trying to have the police deal with domestic violence seriously. It's quite difficult when you have amongst the police force itself men who themselves are involved in domestic violence incidents, and then they're kept on in the police force. It imbues a certain attitude towards women and women's complaints about the system. And I'm afraid that there is a level of misogyny. Not all men, of course, but there's a level of misogyny of seeing women as being moaners and complainers. And I'm afraid that we too seldom prosecute men for lesser offences. They would say, flashing, that's not very serious, and so he's allowed to stay in the police force. It is frequently less serious matters that are indicators of something much deeper and much darker. And so I feel that there has to be some much deeper look at policing and the training of police, men and women, about what really can lead on to much more serious crime by offenders.
Do you agree with that?
I do, actually, because we expect our police, we expect them to be absolute pillars of our community, of our society. So I think, actually, there is a higher threshold we expect from our police.
And do they treat some of these crimes in a less serious way?
If they do, then that's completely wrong. The threshold has to be higher. We rightly, we want to trust and respect our police, but that works both ways. They have to prove and they have to earn that trust. They have to earn that respect. And when it fails in this disastrous, horrific scenario, then understandably people ask very serious searching questions.
This is to all of you, but Ash, perhaps you'd like to respond first. One of the senior investigators in the Sarah Everard case, DCI Simon Harding, yesterday said that police officers do not view Wayne Couzens as a police officer. They view him as a murderer who happened to be a police officer rather than the other way round, as a police officer who was a murderer. What do you make of that?
I can see why police officers would want to distance themselves from Wayne Couzens. That's understandable. But the fact is he was able to kidnap, rape and murder Sarah Everard in the way that he did because of his powers as a police officer. He showed his warrant card, he placed her under arrest, and he did so under COVID regulations. Now, that isn't something which is separate to the issue of the murder. It's actually intrinsic to it. And where we do see abuses of power by the police, often perhaps not as extreme as this, but we see them being used against, say, young people of colour in stop and searches, that's just seen as part and parcel of being a police officer. So what I think we need to do is link up this horrific crime against Sarah Everard and get ourselves thinking about when there's a 13-year-old, as happened in London recently, who was placed in handcuffs so tightly during a stop and search that his wrists bled, that he was strangled, and all they found on him was an afro comb, we should make some connections here between the way in which the institution of policing allows and facilitates these misuses and abuses of power which break down public trust.
Ed?
Well, it's quite clear that I'm sort of holding a line here, because I don't want people to think, I don't want women in particular to think if they need help late at night that they shouldn't call the police and they shouldn't expect to get all the help that they could possibly want. I don't know about the rest of the panel, but all of us, I'm sure, have been in a situation where we've needed the help and support of the police, and I've always found them to be excellent and professional. And of course, there will be incidences where there have been terrible abuses. But as I say, I have tremendous admiration for our police force, a largely unarmed police force that does highly dangerous work. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, Wayne Couzens should have been taken out of the police force and indeed prosecuted probably for some of the things he was doing before this horrific murder. It does mean that the police have to be more vigilant, and it does go back to this point of the police having to take these complaints very, very seriously. I do agree with, if there is a sentiment that sometimes it is far too easy to dismiss this as, a bit of banter or a bit of horseplay if somebody behaves badly. It shouldn't be that way. And I agree with Richard. Of course, the police should be held to the highest possible standard, and people should not think that the people at the top of the police force should not think if they allow police officers to behave in a sort of casual way that is unacceptable, that it should be just brushed under the carpet. That has to be reined in.
Right, but does it help then when you do have a senior investigator sort of distancing himself from Wayne Couzens, who was a serving police officer, Ed?
Well, I think what he's trying to say is that this man was a horrific murderer. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a man who committed a horrific crime. And you can't obviously taint the entire police force with his terrible crime. The lessons have to be learned as to why he stayed in the police force. Lessons have to be learned, as Baroness Kennedy pointed out, about misogynistic behaviour that is allowed to carry on without any redress. And again, when commentators and policymakers, for example, react against people who say, perhaps misogyny should be a hate crime, or we should take kind of catcalling in the street more seriously, when they react and say, no, that's just daily life, maybe we should think twice about that and say, actually, no, that is not acceptable behaviour. Calling out bad behaviour, even when it maybe 20 years ago it was regarded as harmless banter, is clearly where we should be now as a society. But I can understand,
well,
I don't want to pillory the investigating officer for perhaps not choosing his words as carefully as he might have done. I want to learn lessons from this. I want the police to learn lessons. I want them to take it seriously. I want to take crimes against women seriously, which they do. But I don't want to pillory the entire Metropolitan Police Service for this horrific crime.
All right, well, others were nodding along with you there. We'll leave it at that point for the moment. Let me just show you this headline in the Financial Times as we talk about something completely different. Older workers and Londoners face highest risk as furlough scheme ends, warning that concerted effort needed to stop City becoming unemployment capital. This is in response to the news that the furlough scheme that supported millions of workers during the height of the pandemic comes to an end today, and the temporary universal credit increase of £20 a week is due to end next week. Now, no doubt many ministers will be watching nervously to see how that plays out in the midst of other cost of living pressures. 3 more energy firms went bust this week. 9 energy companies have ceased trading this month, affecting up to 2 million customers. And many workers, of course, will also see a rise in their national insurance contributions from April as part of the Health and Social Care Levy. This is how Simon Clarke, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, responded in terms of questions, particularly around universal credit increase being taken away.
We recognise that this is a challenging context on prices, and that's why we're making sure that we make this intervention. But to go back to universal credit, it is really important to reaffirm it was always intended to be a temporary response to the COVID uplift, and the cost of keeping that in place would have been the equivalent of a penny on income tax, 3p on fuel duty, £6 billion a year, and that is simply not something which would have helped with the cost of living for families up and down the country either if we'd gone down that road.
I mean, Ed, is cutting that universal credit increase, temporary though it was, a mistake now?
Well, you can talk about the politics of this. I mean, in terms of, as it were, the principle, the universal, as Simon Clarke was saying, the universal credit uplift was a temporary measure to support people during the COVID pandemic, and it was £9 billion the government injected over a period of time, and it's injected billions and billions of pounds into furlough and supporting businesses and supporting individuals. But I think that the principle that these are temporary measures and that we should go back to spending within our means is a principle that Rishi Sunak is following, which I support. Now, you can argue that the politics of this are very complicated, that it is always the case in politics that you give something to people and then you try and take it away from them, people are going to oppose you on that and so on. But I don't think, for example, if you look at what the Labour Party have said, they have said, here and now, do not remove the uplift, but we're not going to promise that we will never remove the uplift should we become the government, because they know that when it comes to an election, they are going to have to tell the electorate that they're going to be responsible with public spending and taxpayers' money.
Well, let me put that to Helena. Income taxes will have to rise under a Labour government, wouldn't it, if they won the next election, to pay for these things?
That doesn't frighten me. I mean, what I do think is that what Labour is thinking about is taxing some of the things that actually have enriched people. Some people have got richer. Let's be realistic. Some people have got richer during COVID. People who are, live in the stockbroker conveyor belts, people who have shareholdings, people who own extra properties that they rent out, and they are not paying, if they're pensioners and older people, they're not paying additional tax on that at the level that they should be paying it. And I think that there are ways in which you can raise tax, and Labour will be, of course, I suspect, looking very closely at it, will be doing that as we go forward. So some people have done very well, actually, out of COVID, not least people who got contracts from the government out of COVID. So let's just be clear that the people who are bearing a heavy burden are ordinary people. And when you take this 20 quid away, people are going to suffer. And so, yes, it was put in as a temporary measure, but we're not out of that situation yet. And so, I mean, I really do think to take it away at this moment is a very damaging thing to the least well off in our society.
Ed?
Well, that is precisely the point that Labour is making. They will say that taking it away now is the wrong thing to do, and say, for the sake of argument, the government delayed it by another 6 months. We'd be having this argument again in March next year, where the argument again would be taking it away is the wrong moment. I mean, the government made it clear it was a temporary measure. It is going to be removed. It will be potentially politically damaging for the government, but the government's priority, which I support, as I say, is to get the public finances back on track. Now, if Labour want to argue that there should be a permanent uplift in universal credit, that's a perfectly legitimate position for them to have, and they can show people how it will be paid for, and they can argue it out at the general election and at the ballot box and see if people agree with them on that.
Helena?
You know, this business of we've got to get our finances back on track is going to be a while before we get our finances back on track. Let's be realistic. And I know that the mantra is that Brexit's got nothing to do with it. But actually, a very, very sparse amount of planning has taken place in order to deal with many of the things that are going to make food prices rise. Many of we know that electricity and gas are going up all the time. And so people are going to have higher bills. And to do this at this time is punitive on the very people that you know are going to carry this. And there are lots of well-off people who are not going to suffer the consequences in anything like this way.
Richard?
That's the point. This would be an appalling time to remove. Yes, it's a temporary measure, but the truth is the least well-off, the most vulnerable in society are going to suffer this winter because of the huge increase in energy bills as a direct result of this Conservative government's utter mismanagement of energy policy over the last decade. This would be the wrong time to do it. Let's see where we are.
Well, when would you do it? Because your party's conference this weekend. When would you do it, or would you make it permanent?
When we can clearly see that this economy is growing again, and you don't grow an economy by taxing more, you grow it. Actually, you've got to cut taxes for the least well-off, the smaller businesses. So you've got to have smart regulation, not daft regulation, and you've got to put the foot on the accelerator of growth. And hang on. That's how you grow your way out of this crisis. We cannot tax our way out of this crisis. That is the road to ruin.
Ash, I'll come to you in just a minute. Sorry, Ed, you first.
Well, first of all, the government is putting £500 million. They announced it yesterday to support the most vulnerable during the winter. And secondly, I don't see how you can face both ways. On the one hand, say, keep the universal credit uplift, and on the second hand, cut taxes in order to create growth. To keep the universal credit uplift permanent, you would have to raise taxes.
Nonsense. That's completely nonsense, because the Tories, for whatever reason, want to impose austerity Mark II. Actually, the government's balance sheet is fine. We can accommodate this level of debt as long as you go for growth rather than try and tax your way to unnecessarily repay debt that at the moment does not need repaying.
Ash?
Oh, look, I'm sorry, Ed, you're talking about principles. Where I live in Tottenham, I see queues around the corner for the local food banks every day. And that's before the end of furlough. So your principals aren't going to be buying school shoes for those kids who are struggling, not going to be putting food on the table. That 20 quid is the difference between destitution and just about surviving.
Ash, do you want to have a glass of water? Because I can feel that you're running out of voice just at that point. and let Ed respond while you're clearing your throat.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, obviously, these are tough decisions to take, but the government has a very generous welfare system. Universal credit was a big reform, bringing together 6 different benefits, making it much easier and more straightforward for people to claim. Universal credit is there to support people on low incomes. We can argue to and fro about the whys and wherefores of what level of universal credit should be, but billions and billions and billions of pounds go into supporting hardworking people, and particularly people on low incomes. But this was a temporary measure. It was clearly put in at the time of crisis to support people through the toughest economic situation that we've faced in years. And it is now in theory, the government is now going to maintain the policy that it set out at the very beginning.
One at a time. Go on, Richard.
So, Ed, you're happy, basically, for the lowest paid, the least well-off in society, to have this reduction whilst they're facing huge increases in energy bills. Many people, hundreds of pounds, literally, every year, you know, and how that flows into them as they face into the winter. I think it's a really scary time for people. I think it'd be wholly inappropriate.
Helena, I just want to talk to you about something you said in the first answer. You're not frightened by the idea of income taxes going up. It doesn't frighten you, but it might frighten quite a lot of Labour voters.
Well, yes, but if you make it clear that who it is that's going to be taxed, and what was in the speech by the Labour leader Keir Starmer yesterday was that you really take this to the broadest shoulders.
Yeah, but what does that mean, the broadest shoulders? How will they be taxed? Well, that we don't know yet, do we, from Keir Starmer?
The interesting thing is that, you know, it's like all these things. As you get closer to the point of an election, you get a clearer sense of where the finances are at that time. So you start knowing what you're going to be dealing with and what money there is in certain pots. So, I mean, to actually declare at this point in time what you're going to do when you don't know the facts, you're not sitting in the exchequer at the moment with all that stuff in front of you. So all I would say is that what they're making clear is that people who are earning huge salaries should be paying more money.
And what sort of salary is that? What's a huge salary?
Well, let's just look at the number of people who are running, for example, the people who are vice-chancellors of universities. I personally think that they're being paid the sort of money that shouldn't be paid to vice-chancellors. I think that there are lots of people who are earning, you know, we've got the hedge fund folk, the banker folk, but we've also got the, you know, the commercial lawyer folk. I'm in a work profession where there are people who earn huge sums of money.
But you would accept
paying more tax.
But you would accept that won't raise the sums of money that Labour will need to obviously fund the big pledges that they've made.
Well, I think that you have to look at what can be generated from a number of different things, like, for example, multiple properties and people who are rentier, the rentier class. We have to look also at the number of people who are not paying.
Why not? What's wrong with that?
Because we should be focusing on growth. You can't tax your way out of this crisis. We will just have stagnation. We will have low growth. You have to grow your way out of this crisis, and the only way you do that. There was no comment from Keir Starmer in his speech. You've got to do that by actually creating a situation by cutting taxes for the least well-off, small businesses. That's how you generate growth, because individuals and small businesses, they will always spend their pound in their pocket and get more value, much more than a civil servant.
I'm going to let Ash in. Ash?
Look, I completely agree with Helena, and I think that Keir Starmer needs to be a lot more assertive about taxing those with the greatest ability to pay. If you equalise capital gains and income tax, which, by the way, is an old Tory policy, you bring in £90 billion over 5 years, a 1% tax on millionaires, £260 billion over 5 years. And these are ideas which have broad public support. People don't want to see 20 quid taken away from some of the most deprived people in this country. They want to see the landlords, the bosses, the people who made a ton of money during this pandemic, giving something back to society.
Richard?
What you want is growth that creates higher wages. We are beginning to see some higher wages for the lowest paid.
For HGV drivers, for
which
example.
Which is part of the Brexit dividend, which I'm delighted about, but that's a separate subject.
We'll come on to that in just a moment. But this idea of...
Higher growth leads to higher wages. That's how we get our way out of this crisis.
How do you intend to pay for public... How do you intend to pay for public services, though, Richard, given the fiscal impact of the pandemic, if you don't want to raise any taxes?
We've got the highest tax take in 70 years in this country, and the lowest growth forecast in 60 years. Look at successful economies like Australia, where they've got 28%, not 35% total tax take. They grow much faster than us. That's how you get higher tax revenues over the medium term. Our balance sheet, the government's balance sheet, can easily accommodate it for the next 5 to 10 years.
Ed is shaking his head, and I'll come back to you, Helena.
Well, I mean, it's just a sort of load of old nonsense. I mean, you know, either if you're going to keep the universal credit uplift, you've got to raise taxes. Richard says you can lower taxes and keep it. Australia's economy is growing because it's benefited from a massive commodity boom over the last 20 years.
Because they've got low taxes.
That's absolute nonsense. This government, the top 1% earners in this country pay 23% of the income tax. If you want to tax the rich, this government is planning to raise corporation tax, if you perceive that as a tax rise on the rich, but it's planning to. So I think we've just got to slightly get all this in perspective. People do pay their taxes. And in fact, tax enforcement against evasion the government's put a lot of money into it and is much more effective at getting tax back from people who try to avoid it. I'm not going to, in any shape or form, justify people who have either profited from the pandemic or try to avoid their taxes. But I think if you're talking about wealth creation, the wealthiest people, while we might envy them their large houses, do pay quite a lot of tax.
Helena?
Listen, I had hoped that this pandemic and that would have given us some sort of reflective moment to say the economic model is not working, and this business about trickle down from the very rich and so it hasn't worked. And so what we have to be thinking about is a different way of doing things. I happen to agree with Richard that you have to support small businesses and people who are entrepreneurial and put money into the young who've got great ideas for things. And we have neglected our manufacturing sector in the most terrible way and made it all about the financiers. Well, let's just do a bit of investing in our own people. And this climate change thing is giving opportunities for us to be thinking about the many ways in which different businesses could be created up and down the country, which could actually be supported by government in sensible ways. So on that particular thing, I'm really in support of helping small businesses to become manufacturers, producers of stuff, and to be employing more and more people to do it. But I also want to see money going into our services. And we have watched a wholesale attack upon medicine and the National Health Service. Whatever you may be telling people, you're actually by stealth privatising whole sections of it. And I have a whole part of my family involved in the National Health Service, so I know a bit about this stuff.
And what are you using as examples of that privatisation of the health service?
Look at what happened over COVID, where we, instead of using the sense of track and trace, instead of using the resources that we had inside the National Health Service, which we've had to return to, we gave it all to people who made hand over fist amounts of money and did it seriously badly.
Well, Ed, you're shaking your head. Respond and then we'll move on.
Well, the word privatising the NHS, the phrase always gets me because I genuinely do not know what it means. Does it mean, the vaccine that has, in theory, got us out of this pandemic was manufactured by a private company, by private pharmaceutical companies. We use private companies to supply the NHS. The principle about the NHS is that you get high-quality healthcare free at the point of need, regardless of your income. But if private companies want to supply the NHS, I cannot see why that is a problem. And this phrase privatising the NHS is used with sort of gay abandon. It's completely meaningless.
All right, we're going to move on. Let's just show you this headline in the Daily Mail. We're talking about the Labour Party. Their conference, as you know, in Brighton ended yesterday. Keir Starmer making his first in-person speech as leader. The headline is Hard Left Labour Laid to Rest. Not as easy to say as it looks on the paper. And that's after Keir Starmer certainly wanted us to report that he'd buried Corbynism to some extent, or that agenda, and seemed to be echoing policies that sounded more similar to the new Labour years under Tony Blair. So, Ash, right-leaning newspapers like the Daily Mail praising the speech. What do you make of it?
Well, of course they would. They've got an interest in marginalising the left, and they'll celebrate anything they see as having done that. Now, I don't think that is a completely fair picture of what happened at conference. Keir Starmer was unable to push through this return to the Electoral College and disempower the membership. He simply did not have the support within his party. He did get, during that speech, that kind of Kinnock-like moment of slapping down the left, which is, I think, something he was really after. But that energy and that politics has not gone away within the party. You've still got the Socialist Campaign Group, who are 4 short of the number of MPs needed to trigger a leadership contest. And so I don't think that we are anywhere near the kind of marginalisation of the left under Blair, or even the kind of weakness of the left we saw just before 2015.
Right, so you say that the energy of the left is still within the party, but I think you've left the party. You've cancelled your Labour Party membership earlier this month, so you've gone.
I did for multiple reasons. One was simply I just couldn't deal with the internal finicking over process anymore.
Right.
When we're facing a climate crisis, a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, honestly, I can't say this in an Ofcom friendly way, but it was just incredibly boring.
Well, keep it Ofcom friendly, please.
And then the second thing was, being a journalist, I think that, when you no longer fully believe in the projects, then actually what you need to do is take a step back, be able to take things objectively, criticise and praise in an objective way and not fear exclusion.
Was that the point of Keir Starmer's whole agenda this week, was to see people like Ash Sarkar leave the party? In other words, see the end of the Corbyn era and a left-leaning agenda?
Listen, people come and go in terms of party membership, and so I'm not going to talk about Ash's decision. She's a journalist. I actually think it's quite good for a journalist to be independent of party memberships. But I do think that it's very important for a political party. Political parties are a conglomerate of different sections of of course they'll have a left and they'll have a right and they'll have a middle and they'll have all of that. The important thing that parties always have to remember is that they are speaking to a wider public. They are speaking to people who are not members of the party. They're speaking to people up and down the country who actually might decide one way or the other on where their vote will go. And so I thought that what was rather helpful was to have somebody seeking to speak to the concerns beyond the sort of discussions that happen, the minutiae. If you're talking about minutiae, Ash, it's the business of people fighting over miserable, small issues, which are not what are concerning ordinary people up and down the country. And so I don't want to be taught lessons about politics over the years. I've had my disagreements with Labour over things as well, but I stay true to the fact that I want us to be able to be back in power, because back in power, we then can make a difference to people's lives. And until you're in power, you can say all the lefty things you like. Until you're in power, you cannot make a difference to people's lives. And sometimes people live in that small margin. It can be an inch, but they live in that inch, they live their lives in that inch, and it's about wanting the best things for their kids and their grandkids and wanting them to have opportunities and wanting to get by and to live a decent life.
Ash?
To have a holiday, to be able to do things without having to go to food banks. That is what Labour does in power, and I want Labour back in power.
Ash?
Look, I completely agree with Helena that this, internal politicking over thresholds, that's of no concern to anybody in this country. But we've also seen, I think, a degree of hostility when it comes to talking about real substantive issues. The resignation of Andy McDonald because he was told to argue against keeping sick pay in line with the living wage. That, to me, shows a party which isn't serious about having these meaty discussions over things that could really improve people's lives. You saw Keir Starmer ignoring a young Green New Deal activist who was concerned about climate change. Now, I happen to think the climate change policy, 28 billion in spending, is very good, but these are precisely the kinds of people who should be listened to. And I just want to say one thing, which is I spent a lot of time at the World Transformed, which tends to be a lot younger than Labour Party conference. And I was meeting 16, 17, 18-year-olds who really were too young for the Corbyn moment, but who do feel that they have these really urgent political concerns on housing, cost of living, debt, and the climate crisis. And the Labour Party isn't doing much to meet those concerns. And I think that those people should be engaged with, should be listened to. And if the Labour had any sense, they would mobilise that energy.
Helena?
Well, I certainly think that we should be having much better conversations and using that energy that comes from the young. And they do want a better world. And we mustn't forget that business, which is about having ideals, having principles, but marrying sometimes your principles with pragmatism, because otherwise you don't get a delivery, you don't get outcomes, you don't win elections. And so it's always painful. I've been involved in wanting social change and social justice since I was the same age as the people you're talking about, since I was in my teens. And so all I would say is that you sometimes as a leader have to make really difficult movements in order to give comfort to a greater number. And we have to be empowered in order to do that.
All right, I just want to bring up something with Ash, because you mentioned this £15 minimum wage row, which ended up in Andy McDonald quitting his front bench post. There's been some controversy surrounding the organisation you work for, Novara Media, on this, because you campaigned for the £15 minimum wage. You yourself said it's shameful that the party isn't supporting it. But in January, you were advertising for a job at £12.50 an hour. Clear up for us what happened.
Sure, we raised our wages to £15 by February the 1st of 2020.
Right,
and our pay is going up to £16.50 this Friday. So we've always been a living wage employer as soon as we were able to move from volunteering to paying people. And Jo, come on, you've got to believe more than what you read in Guido.
Well, that's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking you. That's why you're here. Listen, people have raised it. You can clear it up for us.
I'm on a healthy £15 an hour wage. We all earn the same wage in Navarra, regardless of your seniority. And it's going up to £16.50. So we are well above the minimum wage. We will keep paying our workers more because that's what we think people deserve, a wage that they can live on. I just wish that Keir Starmer felt the same way.
All right, we're going to move on to Keir Starmer and Brexit. Richard talked about HGV drivers a little bit earlier, but let's have a listen to what he had to say about the issue.
The government is learning that it's not enough to get Brexit done. You need a plan to make Brexit work. I do see a way forward after Brexit. If we invest in our people and our places, if we deploy our technology cleverly, and if we build the affordable homes we so desperately need. But the public finances we inherit will need serious repair work.
Is Brexit working?
There's many things that are working, and of course there are some challenges, mainly through the COVID crisis. But as I said earlier, the great thing is that some of the lowest paid, the least well off, like the lorry drivers, they are starting to get negotiating leverage against big business, against the big employers who had taken them for advantage because they had access to lots of relatively low-skilled EU workers. So this is a good thing. The idea of increasing the visas for 3 or 4 months is ridiculous. The suggestion that there's like 5,000 lorry drivers sitting on their backsides in Europe waiting for the phone call is just absurd.
Well, when you say it's absurd, what would you like to see?
More
visas, a temporary relaxation of immigration rules?
This is big business and their lobby groups campaigning so that they can keep pay rates down. What I'd like to see is the lorry drivers being properly paid, given proper facilities, properly looked after, properly respected, so that more people stay in the industry and come into the industry, and to get rid of some of the bureaucracy that we're learning about, for example, from the DVSA. There's some unnecessary bureaucracy you've got to get rid of to make it easier and more desirable, particularly for HGV drivers.
Right, has Brexit delivered higher wages then for lorry drivers, Ed?
Well, I think Brexit is partly to blame for the difficulty we have with lorry drivers, because there are lorry driver shortages in Europe, but because it's free movement, they can be, as it were, equalised across the continent. But Richard is right. There are all sorts of other factors in terms of driving down wages and so on, which to a certain extent we're all complicit in because we benefit from the lower prices. But this has clearly been an ongoing problem for the last 10 or 15 years, which has exploded at an unfortunate moment. I mean, I think that what lies behind what Keir Starmer said, which I do agree with, is that Brexit is the end of the beginning, as it were. That we are going to have this relationship with Europe now, which is going to be complicated and sometimes fractious, and there will be, I think, in elections to come, in different manifestos, proposals to either bring us back or further away from Europe in terms of particular specific issues. It could be visas for lorry drivers. It could be other issues. But that will be an ongoing discussion.
We haven't got much longer left on the programme. But, Helena, what does it mean, making Brexit work? It doesn't sound like a wholesale renegotiation of the treaties, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't. I mean, and what it does mean is that you have to plan for this stuff. And it is shocking that there has been very little in the way of planning, because we knew, I chaired a committee, a select committee, that was looking at the post-Brexit stuff. And we knew that there was going to be a shortage of doctors, because a whole lot of doctors from across Europe were working in our system and they've now gone home. We knew that, I mean, there's a whole issue just now. It's not just lorry drivers. Our health service is depleted of nurses and of many of the people who did those jobs who came from other parts of Europe. And so we should have had a plan in place to replace that. We haven't done it. GPs, we can't see our GPs because there's a shortage of GPs.
Okay.
Why? Because we haven't planned forward.
It's not a shortage of GPs, it's because they're working from home. They want that. Far too many of them, regrettably, seem quite happy to see people
Richard, there's
on the phone call as opposed to face-to-face.
There's a shortage of GPs.
You've got about 10 seconds, Ash, to make a comment. I'm sorry, we've run out of time.
I mean, look, 3 GPs are quitting a week. So, Richard, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not because they're sitting at home. It's because they're quitting their jobs.
All right. On that, that's all we've got time for. But I will be back tomorrow with highlights of the Labour Party conference and a roundup of what's been happening in the parliaments around the UK. That's Politics UK, 12:15 tomorrow. Politics Live will be back on Monday. Thank you to all of my guests. Bye-bye.